All right, Matthew, welcome to Module 2 Training Zones, Science, Simplicity, and Effectiveness. What do we got for this module?
Yeah, so this one that has actually been pretty popular. This has been one of our most popular podcast episodes. I think because no one really talks about training zone science and kind of what they're used for.
There's a lot of hearsay and, bro science that gets passed around about zones. And there are so many different ways to measure zones. It's how do they all apply? What do they mean? What's the underlying science behind them? And so we're going to break all of that down, really, so you understand zones to their full effect.
So here's what we're going to do today. So we always do this thing called the 5W's, and we're going to do the 5W's of training zones. That's how we're going to start off. And then we're going to go back and review the energy systems. We talked about them in the last module. We're going to talk about them again because there's a lot going on with energy systems. So there's the threshold. You might think of the FTP, critical power. There's about a zillion thresholds that you could be using. We're going to talk about what that actually means for you and what it means, what's happening inside of the body and how we use that information. We'll go over some files, and we're just going to start to introduce how we analyze files. And we'll get into that and talk about zones within those rods. We can do zones a few different ways. We have a few different methods, and we're going to break those down and talk about the differences between them. Then we have our takeaways and a link to a podcast. Okay, so Will, what are training zones to you?
For me, I use them really two ways, like setting, training intensity, and then like post analysis. So monitoring like either training or race effort, like time and zones, that kind of thing.
So it's like a numerical guide, like as a way to guide your training, right?
That's exactly it. Like we're talking language, right? So we want to be talking the same language wherever we are in the world. Like if we're working with athletes on the other, in a different continent and different nation, we can say zone 1 and we want it to mean the same thing. And they can say I rode or ran in zone 1 and I know what they mean and they know what I mean.
Yeah, so that's why we have them, right? So who uses them?
Well, I wouldn't say that's the only reason we have them. Like we also have them for the specifics of intensity, so representation of intensity. I think everyone should use them.
Yeah. So coaches and athletes. So I can say to you, I spent all day in zone 1. And you'll know exactly what I mean immediately because you know what zone 1 represents, right?
Yeah, you were on the couch.
Yeah, no. That'd be, I don't even know if there's a zone for that. That's just rest, right? Because zone 1 is actually, it's okay, right? It's okay to spend time in zone 1.
It is.
Active recovery. So I guess the way we use it, we can use it for language between us, and then you and I as coaches and scientists can use it as language between us and our athletes.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
When do we use them? For me, we pretty much use zones all the time. So if I prescribe a workout, I say, here it is, zone 1 to zone 2, standard endurance day. That's where we spend most of our time training in endurance zone. So I use it when we're prescribing training, when I'm talking with athletes, like, did you stay within the zone? And then when we're analyzing the rides as well and your runs. So all the time, actually, right? Anytime we're talking about training, we're talking about zones.
It's always zone. It's always zone representative.
Yeah, so that means they're pretty much relevant everywhere since they're relevant all the time, right? This is the basis of what we do, is zones. And then
regardless of sport.
Yep. Yeah, so actually the zone 2 in cycling is pretty similar to zone 2 in running, isn't it?
Whoa. Yeah, it has the same number after the word zone.
Yeah. So the whole point is that we're expecting the same demands, similar demands, at least as far as energy systems go on the body. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and that's right. So like that's where the language can be conveyed similarly across any kind of sport. So like a triathlete obviously undertakes 3 sports and they can convey that same meaning of zone 2 pretty much directly associated with aerobic development, as we discussed in module 1, and they can just apply that to all of their 3 sports. And whether they're measuring heart rate, running pace, obviously you're not going to measure running pace in the pool or on the bike, but you can use it to measure zone 2, and you can use power on the bike, which you're not going to use in swimming, to measure zone 2. So it's always zone 2. The way we measure it is going to be a little different. but it's going to represent the same thing. That is zone 2, and then that is aerobic development. And even as an athlete, you don't need to necessarily need to know that aerobic development side of thing. That's for your coach, and maybe even for them, it's for one of their associates.
And then we'll talk about so we have our 6W that we always have in the podcast, right? It's not even a W, it's an H. So we're going to talk about how we set training zones. There's a zillion ways to do it. We're going to talk about why we use what we use.
Dr. Matt and I started the Performance Advantage podcast to help runners, riders, and outdoor competitors integrate sports science more effectively into their training and racing.
So over the last few years, Dr. Will and I have covered topics like the lactate threshold, training zones, power meters, and fatigue. Now we're condensing these popular and misunderstood topics into practical courses.
Our courses take our same podcasting style approach to learning and education, and we break it down into bite-sized chunks that you can digest either all at once or as practical little resources to use as and when you need them.
So the biggest difference between our course and any other course you might have taken is that we don't lecture you. It's a conversation between Will and I, and we're explaining complex sports science principles in an easy to understand manner.
Yeah, we also integrate how we use them on the regular. Our courses come with a certificate of completion, as well as a lot of takeaway resources such as training plans, scientific articles, and quizzes that you can do to check your progress along the way.
Our sports science courses are available now. Register on performanceadvantagepodcast.com for immediate access.